This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
Thank you very much, Richard. And thank you very much to AB Colombia for the invitation to speak this afternoon. I was looking at the program and I saw that I think I'm right that I'm the only company representative speaking today. So there's quite a lot I want to say, and I won't say most of it, but I'll try and fix on a few points, some of which I had prepared for the subject of this panel. I'll try to pick up one or two of the issues that have been raised about the position of companies up to now. One of the things I wasn't planning to say, but will, because of some of the observations that have been made, is that when I visited the Eden Project, which is the most fantastic place, and for those of you who haven't been, I thoroughly recommend it. One of the things I was pleased to see there was that they have when I went, they had a sort of a model of a house where it wasn't working fully when I was there, but you had to work out what the elements of that house are that are made up of minerals or mining products, and it goes about and it takes away each thing that's made up of a mining product, and you're left. I can't remember. I think you're left with some fruit not in a bowl anymore. Maybe some fruit in a ceramic. I can't remember exactly what there is, but there isn't much left at the end. You start up with this house, and it gradually dismantles around you as you're pressing the different buttons, because we need mining. Whatever you think about it, we still need mining. And it's a very, very obvious point, but sometimes it gets forgotten about in the debate. So I just did want to make that. The other comment I wanted to make in response to Richard's introduction about his role in the Colombia Solidarity campaign and the campaigning he's done in the Cerrejón mine in La Guajira, in Colombia, is that and I have to be a bit careful here because I don't want to say too much, but I want to congratulate him. If I say too much, it will sound very funny, but I want to congratulate him for the fact that he and colleagues in that campaign have actually been successful agents of change for the way in which Cerrejón and the companies who are shareholders of Cerrejón approach some of the issues which were concerns that he raised. Now, I'm sure we will continue to disagree on quite a number of issues, but I did want to say that a few years ago, Cerrejón commissioned an independent third-party review of in particular the tobacco resettlement that Richard referred to, and that has led to some very significant changes in the way the company actually approaches its resettlement practices, specifically in its social development policies and processes also. I'm sure Richard would think that much more needs to be done, but I think that he would probably agree that there's been a significant change since then. Just on to Anglo-American and our geographical footprint, you'll see from the slide there that we have multiple commodities. We mine copper, platinum, iron ore, coal, diamonds, various things. And we're present mostly in Southern Africa and South America. Our interest in Colombia is we have a small exploration office looking for copper in Colombia, and we're also third shareholders in the Cerrejón mine alongside Extrata and BHP Billiton. The interesting thing, I think, from Anglo-American's perspective is that about 85% of our operations are in the developing world. So the sustainable development and the social development challenges that are being talked about here are ones that we are very, very familiar with. I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach to human rights and development and how we, within the company, and I think this is the perspective I'll try to bring in the next 5 or 6 minutes, which is very, very brief amount of time to do it, but how some of these issues are actually seen within a company. So you might sort of imagine that the company, a multinational, is this huge beast that sort of sits somewhere in all sorts of different parts. And what is it? What does it look like? And how does it think? And how does it work? And as one who didn't spend most of his life in the mining industry, when I came to Anglo-American 6 years ago, that was one of the really interesting things. It took me a while to work out the answer to that question. I'm not sure I really understand it entirely now. It's a very big company. We employ around 130,000 people around the world in quite a number of countries, as you've seen. But I think to understand how the company actually works on the inside and how it thinks is very important for trying to get a handle on how some of the challenges we've been talking about can be addressed. And I'm just going to pause on that point and say, and just make another fairly obvious point, but an important one. which is that we're interested in operating long-life mines, large long-life mines. That means we're going to be there for decades, many, many decades in some cases. And so, although you might not necessarily instinctively see this as being obvious, there is actually a huge alignment of interests for the corporation in having excellent relationships with the communities around its operations and the society more broadly in the countries in which we operate, because that only helps our business in all sorts of different ways that I don't have time into now. Good relationships with communities, good development policies working in collaboration between communities, government and the corporation really helps business. And so a lot of what we're about is actually trying to find better ways. We spend a lot of time within the company trying to find better ways of doing this. Now, development challenges are complicated, they're not straightforward. A lot of people are trying to work on them from civil society, government, but also from business. And so I'd ask you to take that away with you too. Just quickly on the Ruggie framework, what does Anglo-American do? And I'm just going to give you a few just snapshots here of different little elements to illustrate. We are supporters of the voluntary principles on security and human rights, and we have been for many years. We are working in collaboration with International Alert to improve our implementation of those voluntary principles on the ground. We work with we have, I suppose, global relationships with three NGOs on development issues, talking about sustainable development. We recognise that we as a corporate are not necessarily the best people to know how to do some of these things, and so working in partnership and collaboration can only help us learn and do it better. One's Care International on the development side, one's Fauna and Flora International on the environmental side, and in particular on biodiversity, and around conflict prevention and conflict-sensitive business practice, which was then International Alert are working with us and teaching us quite a lot. And these are independent sort of relationships where the different parties remain entirely free to say whatever they want, to do whatever they want, criticize each other and so on, but recognize that there is this alignment of interest that I talked about. We do quite a lot of government outreach. We try to encourage governments to protect human rights, for example, to take on the voluntary principles. If they're not doing that, I don't really have time to go into a great deal more. We participate in quite a lot of the various discussions and initiatives that Caroline raised. Now, coming to the respect point, which I suppose is the core of where the corporation is at and how we actually do this. We have, if you like, sitting at the top within the company, a set of, if you like, our code of ethics, our business principles. And what's just one little reflection there, what's very interesting for me is coming into the corporation, my assumption is that these sorts of things just sit on the shelf gathering dust somewhere. That was my assumption. But the number of times I go out to sites, to offices, and I hear people quote our values, quote our principles back to me, explain how they're doing things in line with these high-level ethical code is quite astonishing. That surprised me a great deal. Then we have a series of policies and standards. On the social side, we have something called the Anglo social way, which sets out in some detail our social standards that we expect all our operations to comply with. I've got a copy of that with me if anybody would like to have a look at that. And then I just want to focus for a moment on that acronym SEAT, which stands for Socio-Economic Assessment Toolbox. Managing, and this is about the impact, and this goes to the whole question about development, managing your impact as a mining company is a very complex process. And what we have developed is a comprehensive process to ensure that we have the best possible understanding of those impacts that we can, that we work in collaboration with communities to try to address those impacts, to reduce to a minimum the negative ones, and to boost, to optimize the positive ones. And that our own policies for development thus reflect not our view of what's going on around our operations, but a shared understanding that's been gathered through a comprehensive process. Now, I don't have time to go through all the different elements of this, but it is a public document. We've published the third version of SEAT is available on the web, and other companies actually have taken some of it up, which has got some very, very interesting and structured and thoughtful and effective processes for managing these sorts of operations. And you can see some examples of the things that we're doing on this slide here. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these steps because there isn't time. This is just to show that under each of these different steps within the SEED toolbox, there are specific things that the company, in a structured and formalized way, not in some sort of artificial, this isn't really important to CSR, let's not think about it way, but an integrated business process in which lots of different functions within the company participate. There's a structured process which we go through to come back to and publish, talking about transparency, and publish our findings and also share our plans, joint plans for community development with our stakeholders. I'm just going to come on to, because of time is short, at one of these relationship management tools that we have. When we think about, these are just some examples of all the different issues that we're looking at. And I'm going to look at the complaints and grievance procedures because that was a specific element to the question, does the RUGI framework change the way in which we manage our human rights impact? Well, I think we've been heavily involved in following the discussion all the way through before the actual finalization of the framework, and we've been adapting our processes there. But within C3, the mandatory requirements for complaints and grievance process in all our operations, so looking at our responsibility to respect, but also looking at the whole issue of remedy, this is a crucial part of it. Again, I don't have time to go into this. I would mention that the Cerrejón mine in Colombia was the only mine and one of a small number of businesses who were actually piloting this process within the RUGI framework. And we can talk more about that in Q&A if you like. It's a complex process to get right, and we have been learning quite a lot from how Cerrejón has been piloting that, and that's now mandatory in all our operations. Now, I wanted to address briefly the question about how a mining company can really make a difference when it comes to development. You've heard a lot about the tax issue from the last speaker, from Alex, and it's an important issue. It really is an important issue. And what I'm going to say now I don't mean to suggest that it's not important. But I do want you to stop and think about this chart for a moment, because it's a really, really important chart. This is about, look on it as our turnover for Anglo American. This isn't profit, eh? This isn't profit. It's not that we've made $29 billion of profit. This is about our turnover. And if you look at it, and it's where does the money that we spend every year go? Because the common assumption of where the money generated through this sort of activity goes is that 90% of it goes back to these stinking rich shareholders. And if you look at this, you'll see that the dividends paid, this is in 2011, dividends paid were just over $2 billion, which my maths isn't particularly good, but I put it at somewhere around 8%. If you look at our taxes, you'll see that they were just over $3.5 billion, somewhere around 12–13% of our turnover. And by the way, just a figure, just to check, since there was the earlier debate, Cerrejón mine in Colombia between 2001 and 2011 has paid $4 billion in tax, just to give you an idea of the sort of scale of the tax revenue that it's generated. And I do agree with whoever it was said that it's not only about the money, and often it's not the most important thing, it's not necessarily the money and just the tax generated. The great bulk of this is in our supply chain, and look at our employees. If we're looking really to make a difference in terms of our development impacts, then we've got to look, and we are looking much more about where we procure from, how we help local businesses develop, how we help our employees and our suppliers and our potential suppliers develop the educational capacity and the skills so that they can benefit from this, from where most of the money is actually going. And in many ways, partly due to in some countries due to weakness of the regulatory structures or the government structures or the constrained ability of governments effectively to spend the taxation money generated. This can be, which we also work on, by the way, the whole issue of capacity building, I agree, is crucial. There are so many different strands to this, it's very complex. But don't ignore this chart. If we want mining companies to make a difference, then leveraging our supply chain, leveraging our employee base, that's where we can really, really make a difference as a development actor.
Hugh, we're coming to the end of time now.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, in that case, I will just conclude by saying that thank you again for the opportunity. Happy to answer some of the more detailed points that have come up in questions. And just to reiterate what I believe to be there's the website for C. What I believe to be a really important point is the shared interest and the alignment of interest in actually trying to achieve a very similar goal. It's in our interest to have thriving, sustainable communities around our operations. So let's learn and let's collaborate and let's talk more about how we can achieve that. Thank you very much.